Hello everybody, welcome back to another exciting edition of Edpuzzle Lecture Notes. Today we're going to go over something called passive transport. So what does that mean? Passive, that word means you're not doing anything. It does not require any energy. So if right now you're not paying attention to this Edpuzzle, if you're not taking notes, and if you're not getting all the questions correct, you're being passive. You're being kind of like the same thing as lazy. Now, what does transport mean? Transport means movement. If you're transporting something, you're moving it somewhere. So this is passive transport. This is the movement of substances into and out of the cell that is passive. It does not require any energy. So it happens all by itself. So remember, we have our cells. There's the nucleus. Remember, it's made out of phospholipids, which look like balloons and strings. That's what the cell membrane looks like, and it's a double layer, so it's a double layer of balloons and strings. And remember, certain things can go in and out directly through the cell membrane in a process called diffusion. And that's what's going to be our objective today. Describe the process of diffusion. Alright, so before we get to diffusion, some terms that you'll need to know. I'm going to start at the bottom. The first thing is called a solute. And a solute is just any particle, any substance that is dissolved in water. So if you put salt in water, salt would be the solute. The salt water would be what's called a solution. If you put sugar in water, the sugar would be a solute. I mean, it could be oxygen, it could be carbon dioxide, it could be ions, whatever. Whatever you dissolve in water is a solute. Now, there's different amounts of solutes in water. If you put a lot of, let's say, salt in the water, we're going to say that has a high concentration. So is where there are more of the same molecule. That is a high concentration. We always just write a little H like that to say it's a high concentration of salt or sugar or an ion or oxygen, whatever. Now, kind of the opposite of that is low concentration of the solute. So that is where there is fewer or less of the same molecule. And we signify that with an L. And the reason why this is important, because in diffusion, it's passive transport, so it does not require any energy from the cell, but things always move from high concentration to low concentration all by themselves. For example, right here we have a little container filled with a solution, water, and some sort of solute. Those little dots in the container, those are the solutes. We can say they're oxygen. Well, if you look at it, where are there more dots? Are there more dots inside the cell or in the fluid, in the solution outside the cell? Well, if you look, there's way higher concentration of dots on the outside. So there's high concentration on the outside, there's low concentration of dots on the inside. So through diffusion, those dots are going to move. That oxygen is going to diffuse from high to low concentration, and they're going to go into the cell. Because remember, in diffusion, things always go from high concentration to low concentration. Now over here, we have the opposite. If you look, it is a high concentration of little dots on the inside, that's an H, and it's a low concentration of dots on the outside. So in this situation, the oxygen is going to move the opposite way. It's going to move out of the cell from high concentration to low concentration. And that's all diffusion is. And before we go on through diffusion, and it ain't going to take long because it's pretty easy, let's go over some terms that we should know. Now this one you probably don't know, but it's called impermeable. So that's like this door right here at the front of your house that's totally closed. It's impermeable because nothing can get in there. If that door is locked and it does not open, nothing can get through that door. People can't get through there. Bugs cannot get through there. Nothing can get through there. That's what's called impermeable. Now, if we remember, our cell membranes are what's called semi-permeable or selectively permeable. And that's like having a door, but a screen door. So this is a door that's selectively or semi-permeable. People still can't get through it. Bugs can't get through it. But air, oxygen, and CO2 can easily move through that screen door. That's what's called semi-permeable. Some things can move in and out through it, but others are blocked. And this is what our cell membranes are like. They're semi-permeable. Some things can go in and out, but others get blocked. And the very opposite of impermeable would this be right here, fully permeable. And that would be like your door wide open. And of course, when your door is wide open, everything can move in and out freely. But remember, our cell membranes are semi or selectively permeable. Some things can move in and out, but others get blocked. So what is the broad term of passive transport? Remember, if you are passive, you are basically just sitting there doing nothing. You're not using any energy at all. And transport, remember, that means to move things. So this is moving substances without using any energy. So what is it? Passive transport is when water or other molecules move across the cell membrane without using any energy from the cell. So make sure you take that down in your notes. Passive transport is when water or particles, molecules, move across the cell membrane without using any energy. And the reason they don't use any energy is because they're moving with, or sometimes it's called down, their concentration gradient. And all that means is these substances, the water or the molecules, are moving from high concentration to low concentration. And whenever you do that, it does not require any energy. All right, so a little thing to help you remember passive transport. You can see these two pictures where they're both involve mountains. Now these people are going from, so you can see the L here, low elevation, and they're moving up to high elevation. Would it require energy to go from low to high? Does it require energy from the mountain climbers to go up the mountain? What do you think? Well, there you go. The answer, of course, is yes. It requires energy to go from low to high. Same thing with moving substances across the cell membrane. If they go from low to high, it requires energy. Now, the opposite of that are these two guys, these two crazy guys over here. They're going from high to low. So they're going from high elevation, they're jumping off, and they're going to low elevation. The question is, does it require any energy for these guys to fall straight down from high to low? What's the answer? The answer, of course, is no. It does not require any energy. Those guys do not have to flap their arms or do anything special in order to fall, because they are going from high to low. And that's just like diffusion. When you go from high to low, it does not require any energy. No energy is required. And now the specific definition for diffusion. That is a process in which molecules move randomly from where they're in high concentration to where they're in low concentration. So they move from high to low all by themselves. And remember, these types of transport require no energy from the cell. They go from high to low, requires no energy from the cell. So just like this kid right here that's on his slide, since he's at the top, to go from high up here to low down there, it does not require any energy for him to just slide down. Now when he wants to climb back up to get back up to the top and go from low to high, then it will require energy for him to climb up that little ladder. All right, so when we're talking about diffusion, if this over here is a cell, diffusion means these things can go straight through the cell membrane. Remember, the cell membrane is made of what looks like balloons and strings. Those are called phospholipids, and it's a double layer. So there's two layers of what looks like balloons and strings. So that's what that is made out of. And in diffusion, it goes right through the balloons and strings. So it goes right through there. Remember, there are also large doors or channels in the cell membrane. That would be the red guys over here. So that's a door that allows large molecules to come in, but that is not simple diffusion. Diffusion is when they go directly through the lipid bilayer. So what kind of things can go through the cell membrane this way? Hopefully you remember, fats can do it. Also gases like oxygen and CO2. And our last thing, it said water. If you think water, that's fine, but water really doesn't go in that way. But know these. Definitely know the gases. Oxygen and CO2 can go in and out of the cell directly through the membrane. Now, we should know this. Is energy required for diffusion? Let's see if you remember. There you go. Of course, the answer is no. Energy is not required in diffusion because it is going from high concentration to low concentration. All right, so a little diagram here. So we're going to say that circle is a cell, and we're going to say everything outside the circle is the fluid that surrounds your cell. And we'll say that these little dots right here, we're going to say that those are oxygen. Now the question is the oxygen going to move into the cell, or is it going to move out of the cell? Let's see what you say. Well, in this case, since we see there's a high concentration of oxygen on the outside, there's more of these dots, these oxygen molecules, than there are on the inside, low concentration. In diffusion, things always go from high to low concentration. So this oxygen will diffuse into the cell, and it'll continue to diffuse in until there's an equal amount on both sides of the cell. All right, so this picture basically says the same thing, that through diffusion, these solutes, we're going to say it's oxygen, are going to move from high concentration to low concentration. They're going to come into the cell all by themselves. The cell does not have to make them do this. They do it all by themselves, and that's what's called diffusion. And is energy required for this to happen? The answer is no. No energy is required for that oxygen to diffuse into the cell from high to low concentration. And basically the same thing as before. So out here we can see that there's a high concentration. We can say this is CO2 within your cell. High concentration of CO2. If you've been exercising or running a lot, you get a lot of CO2. It's a waste. You need to get rid of it, otherwise you'll die. So how does the CO2 get out of your cell? Well, it diffuses. It goes from high concentration, and it'll move out of the cell to low concentration. And it does not require any energy for this to happen. So the CO2 will continue to move out until there's an equal amount on both sides of the cell membrane. And that's what's called equilibrium. When that happens, when it reaches equilibrium, the molecules will still move, but now they will move in and out of the cell equally. So they continue to move out of the cell until they reach equilibrium, and then they move in and out of the cell equally. And once again, basically what the last slide says. So this is where it reached equilibrium. So there's equal amounts of CO2 or oxygen, whatever you want it to be, it doesn't matter. There's equal amounts on the inside as there is on the outside, and that's what's called equilibrium. When that happens, the molecules are still moving, but they're moving out of the cell and into the cell at an equal rate. So there's really no change in the concentration once it reaches equilibrium. And some common examples of diffusion that you can kind of observe on a daily basis. Like this lady right here, she's making cookies or muffins or something. Well, there's a high concentration of cookie smell. Right here, right next to the cookie, that's high concentration. High concentration. But that smell is not just going to stay right there by the cookies. That smell is going to diffuse in all directions. It's going to start spreading out from high concentration to low concentration, and eventually you'll smell it in the whole house. That's diffusion. These little the little molecules that make the cookie smell, those spread out from high to low concentration. That's diffusion. I'm sure we've all done this, where if you put a drop of food coloring in a glass or a beaker of water, well, what happens? Well, when you first start off, that food coloring is going to be like in a little blob, but it's not going to stay there. It's going to move from high concentration to low concentration. That food coloring is going to move away from each other. It's going to start spreading out. And eventually, after 10, 15, 20 minutes, that whole cup is going to be a pink color because the dye is going to spread out from high to low, and eventually it spreads out evenly. And that's all diffusion is. All right, thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.